Do you love grammar or do you hate it? What about your students? Do they love grammar or maybe not so much? It's a big problem in the teaching and learning of languages. Grammar is an essential part of it, but it's often taught not very well. And I'm going to share some of the problems students face and some solutions that you can use as teachers.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. We have a wonderful speaker, Dr. Ken Beatty, who has spoken several times for us at eFuture, and he always has some of the best stories and some of the most engaging presentations that we have. He's a fan favorite. So we're very, very lucky to have him back today. And he's going to be talking about a very, very important topic, grammar. So I know some people have expressed fear and concerns about teaching grammar or studying grammar. So this is the perfect opportunity to get over some of those fears, hopefully, and find some techniques and skills that will be valuable for you. So I won't take up any more time from Dr. Beatty, so I will turn the floor over to him. Thank you very much.
Okay, Joseph, thank you so much. And a big thank you to eFuture for bringing us all together once more in one of these webinars. It's a wonderful chance to sort of share some ideas that I have, but also every single time that I give a talk, it's the questions that excite me the most, because at the end, many of the teachers will ask questions and things that maybe I haven't thought about before, and that's really exciting and interesting for me. So if you do have questions as we're going through, post them as Joseph has suggested, and we'll get to them at the end. If we don't have time at the end to get to your questions, or you think of a question later, please just write me. My email is on the last slide. So please just get in touch personally if you have any questions about this presentation, or you just want, maybe some advice about something else. Okay, so young learners falling in love with grammar. For many people, the word love and grammar do not go together. They're not natural companions. Many people have a lot of difficulty with grammar, and it's partly because it usually is taught not very well. And so I'm going to be trying to share some ideas about how you can teach grammar a little more interestingly, maybe with a little more excitement and some variation, and hopefully with a little bit more love as well. Let's begin. Okay, so I'm going to be talking and using throughout a few examples from eFuture. I note those as we go through, but generally, I just want to say right now that regardless of the age of student that you're teaching, or the level of student, or even the sophistication of the students in terms of grammar, it doesn't matter. All of these principles that I'm teaching are going to be quite similar for all students. Some, of course, very, very oriented towards younger students. That's our focus today, but really applicable to older students. So keep that in mind. So why grammar? Why grammar? So why do we teach grammar? Why is it so important? Well, we teach grammar to express how we think and to understand how others think. Grammar changes randomly ordered words into ideas, and it does that in 7 key ways. So we see on the right in the big heart, we see all the parts of grammar that we normally think about, but there's a few more. There's a few more as well. For example, punctuation isn't mentioned here. The first thing that really grammar does is it expresses ideas about time. And I'm going to focus, of course, on English grammar here, but use a couple of examples from different languages. I spent a long time, I lived in China. For 4 years, I lived in Hong Kong. For 12 years, did my PhD in curriculum studies and computer-assisted language learning there. And so I'm somewhat familiar with Chinese, more so than many other languages. But in some languages like Chinese, grammar does not express time. It does not. Instead, verbs stay the same, and words about time are added. valid. So English uses grammar to express time. So in Chinese, you would say, I eat today, I eat yesterday, I eat tomorrow. And it's the yesterday and tomorrow words that are indicating when the action takes place, not the past tense or the future tense, where we would say in English, I ate or I will eat yesterday or tomorrow. A second thing that grammar does is it shows breaks in thought groups. Now, of course, when we're speaking, we don't see these. Where's the punctuation marks? We don't see these. We exhibit them in different ways with things like intonation. So we ask a question, maybe by just making a statement, but changing the pronunciation. Is it time to start? That's a question. Is it time to start? That's fine. But it's time to start is also a question. So that's just through the intonation. But of course, on the printed page, we don't have that. So we have to have a lot of different marks to show, periods, semicolons, colons, and those basically show breaks in thought groups. Those pauses are actually heard more, commas and ellipsis, and then we show possession and contractions. That's the little apostrophe coming up at the top to show possessive or contraction, making two words into one. And of course, we have the question mark. And then finally, we have the exclamation mark. So all of these are grammatical aspects. They're part of our toolbox. And that's an idea that I want you to think about throughout, is that for every student, grammar is like a toolbox that they can use to shape their ideas a little bit better, to make them a little bit clearer, a little bit more useful. The third thing that grammar does is it uses capital letters. Now, again, many languages like Chinese, like Japanese, they don't have capital letters. So what do? Well, they've got different ways of signifying things. And even European languages like German have different ways. Every noun in German is capitalized. So when you're reading a German sentence, you say, why are all those capital letters there? You're not sure, because in English, we use it at the start of a sentence, and we use it for proper nouns. So it's like the T and the. Dr. Ken Beatty lives in Halifax, the name of a city, Nova Scotia, my province, Canada, my country where I live. So we use it for that reason. Grammar helps to teach when and when not to use those capital letters. The fourth thing that grammar does is it makes subjects and verbs agree. And this agreement, again, it's not the same in every language, but it's really important in English. So I say, you say, he says, she says, it changes. We say, they say. Okay, so all verbs basically follow a pattern that is somewhat similar to this in terms of pluralizing he and she when we have that. The fifth one is to use tenses consistently. So to fit things together, unless we have a slightly different meaning. So he says, after he got, past tense, on his bike and rode, past tense, down the street, he ran over, past tense, a rock and fell, past tense. So all of those verbs, the tenses of that verb is the same. It's all in the past tense. Now, sometimes we change that a little bit. Logically, after he got on his bike and was riding down the street when he ran over a rock and he fell. Why do we say was riding? Well, this is the beauty of grammar. None of it is random. None of it is just like, oh, I just feel like saying it a different way. It's like changes the meaning slightly. And again, let's go back to this idea of a toolbox, because it really is something that we can use to change the meaning subtly. So it shows that he was riding, that the riding was taking place, and then something happened. So it gives a bit more indication about the time, that important first point we made. The sixth thing is to choose the correct prepositions, pronouns, and conjunctions. We can see that in this sentence right here. In, preposition. Where did it take place? In the darkness. She, who? She. She takes, is a pronoun. Pronouns we know take the place of a noun. So I'm Ken or he or him, right? So it identifies who I am without repeating my name, and conjunctions and A and D sort of brings parts of a sentence together. Says this idea was happening, and then another idea happened as well. So the conjunctions show the relationship between two parts of a sentence. So again, that's the function. That's the function of what really we're doing and what we're trying to teach. So this is an important part of grammar. And the seventh part is to express complete sentences. And this one's a little more problematical. Sentences, we usually, when we're teaching, we say, oh, it must have a subject, verb, and an object to be a sentence. But actually, no, actually, hello is a sentence. Yes is a sentence. No, sure, okay, goodbye. Those are all complete sentences because not because they have those three different grammatical elements, but because they express a complete thought. The quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog. This is something you're thinking, what is that about? Unless you're a native English speaker, but all native English speakers, when we're learning to type, we need a sentence that has every letter of the alphabet in it. So we all learned this one. The quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog. Okay, so and many famous writers, of course, they don't use complete sentences when they write. And so I talked to one professor one time, and I thought, okay, it was my PhD advisor, David Noonan, and I said, all right, what would you say about a sentence being this when so many people don't write in sentences? And it was a question my students had asked me. And he said, well, a sentence is whatever an educated speaker of English thinks it is. I thought, oh, that's cheating or something. But actually, it is kind of true. So we just have to sort of be aware of that. But generally, it's about how do you express a complete thought in some way. Okay. All right. So there's 7 things that really we try to do in grammar. And we all learn grammar. But the ways we learn our first language are usually different about how we learn grammar in other languages. So I'm actually a terrible language learner. I speak English. I've studied Spanish. I've studied Chinese. I've studied French. And picked up a little bit of other languages as I've gone along, but I'm not a great language learner. But what I do know is that we learn languages differently than our first. So this is one of my favorite stories about one of my sons. I have 2 sons. This is the younger one. One day when my son Spencer was about 3 years old, I came home from work and I said, Spencer, how are you? What did you do today? Right? And he said, oh, I swimmed with mummy. And I thought, okay, so this is an error. This is a mistake that he's made. A mistake, or is it an error? So we all make mistakes. We all make mistakes when we speak and write. When learners make mistakes, we should ignore them. What? Ignore their mistakes? This is the difference. Errors are repeated mistakes. And those ones need to be corrected before they become fossilized, before they become part of what they say every single time. So in Spencer's case, I had a choice. I could correct him, but I could correct him explicitly or implicitly, or a third choice, I could just ignore it for the moment. So when he said, I swimmed with mummy, I could say, no, Spencer, swim has an irregular past tense form. You should say swam, not swimmed. Try the sentence again. And in fact, this is what we do in class often, is we give this kind of explicit feedback. But of course, you don't talk to a 3-year-old like that. I hope not anyway. So what really happened is I used implicit feedback in this case. So Spencer said, I swimmed with mummy. And I said, oh, you swam with mummy. And he said, yes, I swam with mummy. And he never made the mistake again. I never heard it again. And of course, language professor, I listened for that sort of thing. I never heard him say it again. So it was a one-time thing. So which is better though? Which is better? Is it the implicit feedback, where you just correct and, you say the correct form back to the person, or explicit where you try to give a kind of a lesson? Well, somebody who's much smarter than I am is Professor Rod Ellis, somebody that I work with, and at my university. And he actually did a test. He did a test with some of his graduate students, and he found that explicit feedback is remembered longer and is more likely to be applied to similar language errors. What did he do? Well, of course, his students, these two grad students, they were teaching, and they took different groups, and for some things they taught implicitly, some they taught explicitly, and they kept records of all of it. And in the end, 6 months later, they tested the students, and they found that, yeah, by that explicit grammar correction, that they did actually do better. Should we always do implicit, or should we always do explicit because of this? No, no. We should mix it up. We should mix it up as the case demands. But again, the important thing is not to correct mistakes. When everybody makes mistakes, I make mistakes all the time, right? So in my speech, but you sort of realize that you're making a mistake. So you ignore that and you just move on. Okay, so, but even without correction, we are grammar solving machines. So actually, we're really, really good at actually creating these rules in our brains and using them. So here's the question is, why did Spencer say swimmed? I don't say swim. His mother doesn't say swim. His older brother doesn't say swimmed. So why would he say that? Well, in fact, I think that he created a rule, and his rule was based on other words that he knew. So I walk, I walked. I talk, I talked. I jump, I jumped. I play, I played. I swim, I swimmed. But in this case, it's an irregular past tense verb. So again, but the amazing and the genius thing that this child and every child does is to actually create rules within their heads about how language works. So that's an important lesson for us, because we can kind of trust in students to figure things out themselves and to create rules sometimes. We don't have to write those rules down every time. Okay, so why don't we teach grammar to all learners the way that Spencer learned? Why don't we just have that implicit feedback and let him create rules and do everything else? Wouldn't that be wonderful, right? Well, there's a big reason, is it's inefficient. It's not efficient to do that. And from their first breaths, babies receive enormous amounts of what Krashen called incomprehensible input. It means that, language that they're hearing that it's comprehensible, that it's meaningful communications, and extensive implicit and explicit error correction. When a baby or some young person says something funny like swim, you'll correct them, and sometimes you explain, no, that's not how we say that, sweetheart. You explain it to them in some ways, and they're always listening, they're always absorbing, and they're building up that grammar, the grammatical machine, that toolbox in their heads. We're not getting what you want is one of the best reasons to learn a language at any age. I think that's true. It's certainly true for me. When I travel, and I travel to many, many different, I've been to 75 countries so far. And when I travel to different countries, I often want something, usually food. And I have to think about, how do I get food? So what sort of things should I ask? And I use a combination of pointing or whatever, but, I need to practice the language to sort of say things that I want and things that I don't want as well. So that's kind of important. But it's not efficient for me to just try to learn language by going and living in a country for, years or something. So what about grammar? What about the grammar part of it? Why is the grammar part of language so difficult? Well, we have two different kinds of grammar. The first is prescriptive grammar, and that's what we should say or write according to rules. These rules are often out of date. In fact, many of the rules that we have in English grammar are based on Latin, and the first people who are writing English English grammars, turned around and they looked at, oh, so well, what did they do in Latin? And they looked at the rules there and say, oh, we'll make those same rules for English as well, because they had a great, respect for the educated Latin speakers of the ancient Romans. So, but those rules don't always work. Descriptive grammar is really another way of looking at it. And that's what we do say, and that's what we do write. And it ignores the rules. And this is really what we should do, is we should focus is on this point. Is the meaning understood? And the most important thing is comprehension. Not just grammar, but for other things as well. Many teachers curiously approach me, and with some of I teach graduate students and doctoral students, and once in a while someone will say, oh, Professor Beatty, can you help me? I'm trying to, get rid of my accent. And I think, no, don't do that. I said, first of all, we all have accents. And many of my students, from, say, Latin America, they want to get rid of it. I said, no, your Spanish accent is who you are. It's your identity. And it creates an interesting conversation between us when I can hear a bit of your accent and you can hear some of mine. It becomes a conversation point. And it's beautiful the way you shape language maybe a little bit differently. But the important point, the breaking point, is comprehension. If you use incorrect grammar and I can't understand exactly what you want, that's a problem. If you have an accent that changes the shape of some words, so I don't know what you're talking about, that's a problem. But otherwise it's not. So again, there's kind of a basic grammar, basic pronunciation that we need to be able to do. So again, there's this prescriptive view is a bit wrong, because it's not just how we speak. So we could say things all the time like, everyone take out their book, right? That's not correct, right? It should be everyone take out his or her book, right? But that's awkward, and we don't say it as often. In fact, language is always changing, and this will probably change over time as well and not be a rule anymore. Here's another one. You say, it's me, right? So who did it? It's me. What should it be? It should be, it is I. But who walks into a room or to a party and says, hello, Ken, it is I. Nobody says that, right? It's not what's said. And again, language is always changing. I'm coming home tomorrow. I'll be coming home tomorrow. This one is so obscure, I don't even know what the rule is exactly. I was looking at this presentation as I was putting it together and looking at it just before our talk. And I thought, yeah, why is that? Why is that a rule? But it is. Who are you coming with? Should be, with whom are you coming? Nobody says that. It's not very common. So we end up with one reason why students don't like grammar. So they don't like the rules. But also and they think the rules don't really apply, because they learn a rule, but then they hear everyone or see everyone in writing breaking that rule. But also many learners think, I've already learned this. And it's true, because we tend to teach the same grammar year after year after year. And so no wonder students think, I've already learned this. We studied this last year, right? Maybe they've been taught, but it doesn't mean that they've learned. So that's an important distinction, right? So you can teach someone something, but they don't always learn it, or even if they learn it temporarily, they don't always remember it and apply it. So what's the solution? Before you teach grammar, this is just a good trick for you to use. Do practice tests before teaching any grammar points. Say, okay, does everyone know about the past tense? Yes, teacher, we know about the past tense. Good. Just a 10 item quick test. Do it. I'm not taking the marks. You just see if you know it or not, right? And you go through and they sort of say, oh, I don't know this one. I'm not sure. It makes them more receptive to learning, because they realize themselves, oh, I guess I don't learn this. So that's kind of a good teacher trick to use. So there's different ways to teach grammar, and I'm going to talk about 7 different ways that you can teach grammar. Grammar translation, rule-based, remedial, exception-based, comprehension-based, learner demand, and zero position. Do you know these ones already? If we were all together in one room, I would say, okay, let's do a little test on this. See if you know it already, right? And then maybe some would and some wouldn't. Okay, but let's go through these right now, and maybe I can tell you something new, even about the ones that you do know. And what I would like to do also is to share some ideas about how you can make use of each type in the classroom. So let's begin. Grammar translation, the oldest one. Grammar translation originally focused on dead languages like Latin and ancient Greek. People say in England they wanted to learn, or in Europe or elsewhere, they wanted to learn Latin and Greek. Well, nobody's speaking it. I mean, there's modern Greek, but not ancient Greek. And so they could really only sort of read about how to or learn how to read it. And so they learned the grammar as well. And they translate from Latin into English and English back into Latin. So that was just a way to do. It was really mostly for reading, for learning to read and write, as I say. It wasn't really for learning to listen and speak. In this case, learners compare it to their first language and the grammar to learn another. So they try to look at the two languages and see what's similar and see what's different. Teachers actually can focus on what is different between two languages, especially if you're teaching a large language group. As a teacher in Canada, when I was a young teacher 100 years ago, teaching secondary students, I would have students from, 18 countries in one classroom. But many of you are teaching students who are of the same language group. That's a fantastic opportunity to compare two different languages. So you can focus on what's different between the two languages, including the grammar points. So you can search that. So when you have something like this, you look at what does he do in the morning? What do they do in the morning? Okay, those are two things in English. This is from Hand in Hand. He goes to school. They go to school. Okay, all of these are quite straightforward. And then we see again the she/he differences between the putting on the what we call the plural ending, the es or the s, right? Where that goes. Okay, so this is a soft grammatical exercise. It's not mentioning the grammar rules. It's just trying to show the students so that they can pick it up. And again, they are those language machines, those grammar machines, and they're going to internalize the rules by seeing so many examples. Okay, but when we translate, what do they do in the morning? What do they do in the morning? Say most of our students are Spanish. Well, there's not one translation. In English, we only say, what do they do in the morning? But we don't know who they are. But in Spanish, ¿qué hacen ella por la mañana? ¿Qué hacen ellos por la mañana? It changes the ellas and ellos, excuse my pronunciation, but it changes between these two depending on whether it's male or female. So you think, okay, in Spanish grammar, it's different. It's different. So maybe that causes the students to sometimes make mistakes or not understand what the English is. So because it's not as precise. Actually, English is not as precise as Spanish in this case. So a little bit different. So this grammar translation is still useful in some ways. Learners who rely on online translations, because now you can use your phone and go onto Google and always find out, translate things instantly, even get it to talk back and forth to somebody else's phone. But they don't learn the principles to apply in conversations. And you can't always take out your phone and, in every situation and hope to, do the translation. We teach because they're simply not efficient to do that. So they don't learn the principles. So again, we can't rely upon it too much, right? So what's a task idea? Okay, beyond the textbook, just something fun. Ask learners to use online tools to translate idioms from their own language into English, right? So here's some Korean idioms, and of course, everybody has idioms of their own. A rice cake in a picture. I have no idea what that means, right? Like eating cold porridge. What is that? The lobster sides with the crab. I can figure this one out. That's a little bit easier. A dragon was born in a stream. I have no idea what that means. Okay, what do they mean? Actually, I do know. Rice cake in a picture, that refers to something that you want, but you can't get. You know, you see a picture of a rice cake, but you can't eat the picture, right? So it's about not being able to get what you want or what you can afford. The second one, eating a cold porridge, just means easy. Anybody can do it. It's like it's so easy to do. The lobster sides with the crab means yes, people who were similar in interests, they stick together. And a dragon was born in a stream. This is a lovely one. It means that sometimes somebody who is, destined for greatness comes from a humble beginning. They achieve a great deal, even though they did not, have all the advantages when they were young. So there we are. There we are. There's a little lesson for you in Korean idioms. But what the point is when students do this, they see that actually the idioms don't make sense in English whatsoever. And you could actually, so even if they translate them, they don't make sense. And it's not the meaning. The meaning doesn't come through. So that teaches them something. Okay. Second one, rule-based grammar. Okay, remember there are 7 different ones we're going to talk about. Many textbooks feature rule-based grammar, but rules can be easy or difficult to teach and easy or difficult to learn. Second language acquisition theories explain when learners are prepared to learn and use new structures. So this varies. We realize that some students, like if you're 5 years old, you cannot learn the subjunctive. I don't care. I don't care how good your English is. You really are not going to learn it as a second language speaker. It's just too difficult. Even some of the future or past tenses, they're a little bit too difficult for young children to learn. We have to wait until they're old enough. And fortunately, that's what experts like me and professors who write textbooks and publishers like eFuture do, is they stage the grammar that it's appropriate to the level of the students. We have to consider this. So we do have to explain the rules to students, but at the same time, we also have to set the language at the learner's levels. So this is my next grammar. And you can see the example of this in the last column. Singular means one, plural means 2 or more. To make most nouns plural, add s, right? Okay, so it's so simple. It's so straightforward. A student, learning at this level is going to be able to understand that. So this is really an important lesson for us. When we're giving rules to students, we have to make sure that they're appropriate to their level. There's no point opening up a big expensive grammar book, and going through the explanation if the students will not understand it. It has to be at the level. I love the last one. It says child, children, dear, right? Person, people, and it just says no rules. I love that. I give up. There's no rules. When I was studying French, our French teacher would say all the time. He said, "So why is the letter silent at the end of the word?" He said, "No idea. It just is. It is." So just learn it. And that was his response to so many things, right? So here's the typical sort of thing. And many native speakers don't know the rules. I would never teach this, right? So evidently there's an order that when we're talking about something and we're using orders of adjectives, we would always mention the quantity or number first, then the quality or opinion, then the size, the age, the shape, the color, the proper adjective like the nationality, place of origin or material, and then finally the purpose or qualifier. What? I could never learn that, but actually I did. As a native English speaker, I learned that fluently. I have a pretty tiny new triangular purple English silver olive fork. If I change the order of some of those adjectives in that word, it doesn't sound right to me. Doesn't mean that I know the rule, but it just doesn't sound right to me, to my ear. And again, should we teach this? I don't know. I think in some cases we shouldn't bother. We should just let the students try to figure it out as much by exposure. And again, that language machine, that grammar machine in their heads, let them create some of their own informal rules. There's a lot of rule-based grammar that doesn't make sense. Most of us were taught to use a before words that start with consonants and then an before words that start with vowels. Right. It's a basic rule, but but it's not the real rule. The real rule is you use a before consonants. That's true. But an before words that start with a vowel sounds. It has to have the vowel sounds, not vowels, but vowel sounds. There's a reference here, and at the end of this presentation, there's a page of references for things that I'm talking about, so you can research some of these things a bit more if you like. And also, I think Joseph is going to share with you. eFuture will share with you this presentation as a PDF, and you can always write me, and I'll send it to you as well. Okay, so make sure the rules you teach are realistic. That's quite important. So with rule-based grammar, what's some task ideas? Well, one thing is to ask learners for real-world examples. So if you're talking about comparatives and superlatives, here's an example. The most beautiful thing you can wear is confidence, right? Okay, so it's a silly sort of advertisement, but if you say to students, look for superlatives or look for comparatives in advertising or something, they can find it online, or maybe, there's so much English advertising everywhere in the world, they can probably find some examples there. The important thing is not finding it, of course. The important thing is looking, because then they keep looking at English advertisements. They're improving their English through more and more exposure. So that's a great way for things to happen. It makes it more memorable if it's a local example, something like a billboard that they see. Another one for more advanced students even is to look for errors, because in advertising, we have errors all the time. First of all, brand names often take words and put them together and, so that they can patent them and things. But in this one, again, talking about the superlatives, get in the funnest sport there is. Funnest is not a word in English. We should say most fun. But why do they use funnest here? Well, it's a teaching point, but really the reason they use it is because this is something that a child would say. So it's really sort of giving the idea that it's something children would enjoy. Okay, number 3, remedial grammar. So remedial grammar instruction is for learners who encounter problems. It's like a roadblock. You get there and you say, which way do I go? What do I do? I just, I was going along this road, but now a big stone is in the middle of it. Where should I go? What should I do? That's really what the situation some students find themselves in. And when we offer remedial grammar, they cannot understand what they're reading or what they're writing or what they're hearing or speaking, right? They're not really sure about what's going on. So with remedial grammar, it relies on assessment. So you have to know what the student is having trouble with and not. So again, you need to know the errors. Remember, mistakes and errors. Mistakes once in a while, you know that it's a mistake yourself. Errors when it's repeated. Okay, so assess formatively. So we have summative and formative assessment. Summative is the assessment that you do at the end to decide, can they graduate? Can they, go to the next level? Can they advance? Something like that. Formative is just giving feedback to the students. It's when you give them a test, but you don't keep the grades. You just give them the test and then let them see how well they do. And then afterwards, they get some feedback on how well they're doing. Again, exactly what I said before you start teaching grammar, give them a little mini test to see if they actually know what you're going to teach. If everybody knows, why bother teaching it again, right? They'll just be bored and disappointed. So assess formatively often and rely on peer assessments to let learners help each other. So what's a peer assessment? You say, okay, here's a test. Okay, I'm giving it to half the students and you ask the questions of the other students. And then they will ask you some questions, right? And then they can assess each other and they will help each other. So with remedial grammar teaching, sometimes it's enough just to point out the correct way of writing something when learners make mistakes in their writing or in their speaking. Systematic errors, better addressed with grammatical explanations. So you can give much more information about that and say, okay, this is the problem. This is what you have to do, right? So there's a perspective on difficulty. How do we decide which grammar is difficult? Curiously, there was a professor at Georgia State University who put together this great idea. It's called the difficult easy matrix, and it looks at grammar from learner and teacher viewpoints. It's really quite clever. I looked at this and I thought, oh, that's stupid. It doesn't make sense. But then I kept looking at it, and Pat Bird is the person who put this together in 2021. Difficult to learn and difficult to teach. It's the worst. Easy to learn, but still difficult to teach. Some things are difficult to learn, but they're actually easy to teach. And some things are easy to learn and easy to teach. Okay, great. All right. It sounds crazy. Like, isn't grammar just grammar? No, it's not. Some things are easier and more difficult to learn and to teach, right? So what are some examples? So easy to learn and easy to teach. That's the basic word order in sentences. He is an intelligent teacher. Oh, right. That's what you want to hear. Okay, so in English, we have subject, verb, object, but we also have subject, verb, object in Chinese and Spanish and Thai and Vietnamese, right? But in other languages, it's not. So it's subject, object, verb, like in Korean and Japanese, but it's still easy. Once you explain this to students, they get it. They get it. It's the same as in Spanish. In Spanish, the adjectives follow the nouns instead of coming beforehand. So I can say, I live in a purple house, but in Spanish you would say, I live in a house purple. So it's just arranging it a little bit differently. Okay, so an example, some that are easy to learn and difficult to teach, is the present progressive. I am cooking dinner. It's complicated rules, but actually students pick this up quite easy. The passive, the dinner's being cooked by me. Again, the rules for those are complex, but actually, if you just expose students to it, they tend to learn. What about difficult to learn, but easy to teach? Subject verb agreement, she says, and they say. Students, I don't know why, but they always make mistakes with this when they're learning for some reason. But it's easy to teach. It's just difficult for them to learn. And finally, difficult to learn and difficult to teach. Things like the present perfect verb tense. Where have you been? I don't know why, but students just find this a little bit more difficult. This is important for you to know. It's important for you to know, to understand, because, sometimes you can become a little frustrated and say, it's so easy. Why can't you, why do you keep making mistakes? Well, this is the reason. This is the reason. Okay, so one thing to do is we have to reteach things. We have to reteach things throughout the year, especially those ones that are difficult to learn and difficult to teach, right? So this is, again, something that eFuture does throughout their syllabus. Revisit and reinforce the grammar points. So you take one grammar point, but then you teach it again and again, right? Just because you teach it once doesn't mean the students will remember it. Some things they will. What's the capital of Canada? I know, it's Ottawa, right? Yeah, you probably remember that. But other things like grammar, it can drift out of your knowledge if you're not using it all the time. So again, these things have to be taught over and over again. So we have to build independence. And here's a little task idea, something for you to do. It doesn't matter if they're writing a paragraph or a sentence or an essay, whatever they're writing. But you try to train the learners to become, more conscious about editing their own work. Full corrections and explanations. So say they do a paragraph every week. First week, full corrections and explanations. Second week, give them a handout and circle the errors and give codes. Number 1, subject-verb agreement. Number 2, use of the past tense or whatever. And you have all the different ones, your codes there. Number 3, circle the errors. but don't give the codes. Number 4, put an X in the line in the margin with the error. And then week 5, just at the top, note the types of errors. You can just use the numbers. What is this doing? It's making your job easier and easier and easier, but it's building up the independence of the students to be able to mark their own work and to be self-critical about their own work. Too often, teachers, do spend their whole weekend marking papers, give it to students. What do they look at? They say, oh, A, great. They don't look at it. What do they? Oh, F, I failed. Oh, who cares? Throws apart. They're not learning from their mistakes their way. This makes them learn from their mistakes. So it's a way to use it through remedial grammar. Okay, number 4, exception-based grammar. Many teachers do not teach grammar until there's an exception, something irregular that might interfere with comprehension. Remember what I said before. It's all about comprehension. If somebody doesn't understand you, that's the point at which you really need to work on your pronunciation or your grammar or anything else, right? Your vocabulary. It's if you're not really being understood. Otherwise, teachers assume that learners understand the grammar and can choose language and strategies to make themselves understood. So we're all good. So basically, just wait till there's problems and then solve the problems. So use exception-based grammar to talk about choices. And language is a series of choices. Grammar is all about choices about how ideas are shared. There are always many choices on how you say or write something. You can be very formal, you can be informal, you can be satirical or joking. You can use grammar to talk about things that have happened in different ways or things that will happen in different ways. And there can be different ways, for example, even reasons for this. And we can see this in the passive voice. So the passive voice, there's different reasons for using it. So one is we emphasize key information. If we say the dock was destroyed this morning by Typhoon Penha. Okay, so the dock was destroyed. That's what's the most important thing. So you're foregrounding that. If you're just using the simple past, you would just say the Typhoon Penha destroyed the dock this morning. But that's making the Typhoon Penha the most important thing. So it's emphasizing the key information. But another example, ignore unimportant and unknown details. The secret of the hidden treasure was lost. Who lost it? Well, I don't know. Somebody lost it, right? Okay, so in this case, we don't know the details. So it's not really important. So we use the passive voice there. And a third one is we conceal blame. Eggs have been dropped, their daughter said. Okay, you can guess who dropped the eggs, right? Okay, so in this case, again, we use this, mistakes have been made, and it really conceals blame. So again, I can't say this enough. Toolbox. It's a toolbox for expressing different kinds of ideas in different ways, and it's a set of choices that you make. So how do we get students to explore language in this approach? Again, we're waiting for students to make mistakes, and then we'll teach the grammar. So games are a fantastic way to do that, and this is one from Hand in Hand, and there's many others. But basically, what it's doing is it's allowing students to play with language. And again, they have to communicate and talk about what's going on in each of these little pictures. And that's going to be a little bit different for each student. They're going to say different things, and they're going to express themselves in different ways. And the great thing about pair or group activities like this is students will educate each other because they'll say one thing one way, the other one will say it another way. They say, is that right? Is that right? Teacher, which one is right? They're both right. You're both right. You can say it two different ways. Okay, so then they go on. But if they say something and it's wrong and they don't understand each other, that's the moment you intervene. That's when you teach. So exception-based grammar is all about teaching at an appropriate time. So what can you do? Ask learners to note when they find unusual examples of grammar. So again, okay, class is over. This weekend, though, try to find some unusual examples of grammar, right, that make comprehension difficult. Ask, what other ways could you say this? How does saying it another way change the meaning? So this one says by permit only. What does that mean, by permit only? Really, it means no parking. It's for people with disabilities of some kind, mobility issues. And so the by permit only refers to that. So it's a combination of pictures and language to make up a message. So it's communicating in a different way. So it's a good example of something they might find. Okay, number 5, comprehension-based grammar. So grammar comprehension is about understanding the grammar. Okay, noticing to discover how the grammar makes a difference, and cognitive comparison. Learners compare their own speaking and writing to the target grammar. So it's this comprehension thing. How does this all work? Okay, so example, read the following. Okay, after dinner, Amy had been watching TV when the phone rang, and her friend said that she had just heard that Amy had won the best student prize that afternoon. Okay, so here's the challenge. Write the events in order. Well, isn't that the order? No, 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 no. What are the events? What happened first in the order of all of this, right? So in comprehension-based grammar, we're going to basically giving the students a problem to try to solve. So in the afternoon, Amy won the best student prize. That happened first. And then Amy was having dinner. And then Amy was watching TV after dinner. Then the friend had just heard. Actually, maybe that should be earlier, right? She said she had just heard then. So the phone rings, and then the friend said something. So actually, yeah, I think the friend should be earlier. So the students will debate this. They'll go back and forth and say, no, 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 if this happened first, that's happened second. How do we know these things? How do we know when they happened? Well, that's what the grammar has done. The grammar has, used different things. Had been. When the phone rang, okay, past tense, she said she had just heard. She had heard. Amy had won. So the use of the tenses and the time markers help to do that. It's a complicated thing, right? Here's another one that's quite similar to that kind of comprehension-based thing. Again, from my next grammar. And dear mom and dad, I'm having what? Something, a great time here at summer camp. I made some new, probably friends already. Okay. And there are 10 kids in my cabin. They are from all over. Okay. And now the world. There's sample words that they can insert there. They're solving this puzzle. But again, to do this, they have to use grammar. They have to find the grammatically appropriate word that will fit in there. They can't say, I'm having a horse time here in summer. I made some new horses already. No, it doesn't make sense. Okay, so they're using grammar to do this. So this is an important part about grammar, is we don't always have to just work through the rules and work through exercises. They're actually using grammar to do exercises like this. Okay, comprehension. What's a task idea? Ask learners to think carefully about what they read and hear, and ask them to find a confusing point, and then try to understand what it means. How does grammar help understand it? And then report back to the class. So again, students will be reading or hearing or listening to things all the time. And if they find something that doesn't make sense, see if they can work it out themselves. See if they can figure out the grammar, what's going on there. Okay, number 6. Remember, there's 7 points. We're almost there. Learner demand grammar. Sometimes learners have questions about what they read, hear, or say that are best answered with grammatical explanations. But some learners are too dependent on grammar as a security blanket to be clutched instead of learning to communicate on their own in some way. So what can we do here? Okay, so if they're too dependent, maybe they're just worried about the rules, and they spend too much time thinking about that rather than just trying to use the language, right? With learner demand grammar, it can interrupt lessons. Sometimes the interruption is okay, because if one learner is asking a question, you know that many other learners also don't understand and they need help as well. So that's very, very common. When you have one learner have a problem, many others will have a problem as well. With the learner demand grammar, this was a personal example for me when I was a when I was a child, and my father would use this expression all the time. He would say to me, "If wishes were horses, then beggars would ride." And I had no idea what that meant. I would say, "Oh, Dad, it's so hot today. Can we go to the beach? I wish we could go to the beach." And he would say, "Ah, if wishes were horses, then beggars would ride." All I knew really was that meant no. I don't know what it meant, but I knew that it meant no. "Oh, Dad, can we get ice cream?" Right? He said, I wish we could get ice cream. If wishes were horses, then beggars would ride. So what is it? What is it exactly? So in an explanation of this, if I had to explain this to someone, I would say, how does this work? Well, wishes are not horses, so beggars cannot ride. The meaning here is you cannot always have what you wish for. But the grammar is the subjunctive, and the key word here is because, he thinks if wishes, were horses, it works here. But I would also say, if I were king, and then you think, but isn't if I was king? It sounds right. And in fact, many people say that, but actually the correct language is the subjunctive and would be using were. Okay. Many of times students will interrupt a class in some ways and they'll have something. So this is a question, which we've already given the answer to. Teacher, why do we say an hour and not a hour? So we've got an exercise here appropriate to the level of the students, and we don't encourage, we don't introduce really unusual words here. So these are basic words for the level that are appropriate, but sometimes students will have a more complicated question, right? So here's a tip. Here's a tip for not answering. Sometimes you don't have time to answer. Sometimes you don't know the answer, right? So you can say, "Oh, that's a great question, and I wish we had time for it right now, but I'll get back to you about it next class." So you can always say that, especially if you don't know it, then you can go home and look it up, right? So say, "Teacher, what's the difference between will and shall?" I used to know that. I can't remember right now. Okay, number 2, another way you can say, "That's a great question. Can anyone else in the class explain the answer?" Right? So in this way, you're sharing it. You're sharing it with the classroom. Again, if you don't know it, that's fine. Maybe some other student does. Maybe they know the answer. But a wonderful thing happens when you do this is somebody becomes a hero. There's another student who's going to rise up and say, "Yes, I know the answer to that." And they try to explain it to the other students. That's fantastic. It gives them a chance to be a hero. And they go home that night after class and mom says, "How was school?" Saying, "Boring." "What did you do?" "Nothing." Teenagers say that, right? But they say, but the teacher asked a question. I was the only one who knew the answer, right? And they feel good about themselves and positive about learning English. A third one is, "That's a great question. Look it up. I'll give you extra marks to teach the class," right? So you turn it back to the students and you encourage them. You don't want to discourage students from asking questions, though, but that's why you give some extra marks or something for them doing it. But again, it's a chance for them to show leadership, do some research skills, solve their own problems, become more independent. It's all good. It's all good. The seventh and last one is we call zero position grammar. And we are not explicitly taught grammar in our first language other than by example. That's just the way that we learn, right? Children's errors are ignored when we think they'll grow out of them. Or we tend to use recasts. So that's, again, when I say, "Oh, you swam with mommy," that was a recast. Or we simply say, "No, that's not how you say it," right? Older brothers and sisters say, no, you don't say it like that. I would hear my older son saying that to the younger one all the time. So for learner position grammar, what you do is basically it's mostly recasts and corrections, just on the spur corrections, but without the grammatical explanations. The learner says, "My pencil has lost." "Oh, you mean your pencil has been lost?" "Huh? Yes. Has been?" That's just how we say it. or my pencil is lost, right? So again, you're not getting into the whole grammatical explanation here. You're just giving a recast, basically what they should be saying. In the classroom, you can mix less able and more able learners. The reason why is because the more able ones will help to teach the less able ones. Say, oh, but isn't that fair to the more able ones? Not at all, because we know that to teach is to learn twice. It's basically, we're always going to be those ones who are more able are going to reinforce what they know if they have to explain it to a less able student. So again, just by putting students together, they will help each other a bit more. So sometimes you come up with things, it's a different information, and you just need to decide, teacher, this unit is about comparatives, right? Slower, faster, lighter, heavier, right? So here we have some very basic vocabulary that we're teaching, but just comparatives. If a student asks, teacher, what about slowest and fastest, right? You have a choice. You can say, okay, yes, that's next week. You know that it's coming up. It'll be taught next week. Or you can say to yourself, this is a teachable moment. This is an opportunity. And I could say to that student, say, oh, what do you know about that? Can you share with the other students? How many people know this? And find out and use it as a moment, because this type of question shows me that a student is interested in learning. And I always want to encourage that. We always want to encourage that in the classroom. So, take those opportunities, or even say to the student, say, you know what, next week, we're teaching that, and I think you can help me to do that. Are you willing to help me? Right? Yes, I'd love to, right? Okay. With zero position grammar, sometimes we avoid teaching grammar when the explanations are more complex than just memorizing examples. Or if we think learners will pick it up naturally after using the language more, or if the grammar is obscure. So, for example, the most obscure grammar that I know is the formulaic subjunctive. God save the king. Why do we say that? Why do we say that? It's God save the king if the king should need saving. It's just an expression, an old, Middle English expression practically that isn't used in any other context. What's the grammar there? Don't worry, you don't need to know the rules. It's too complicated. You'll never use it. Just memorize. There's like 3 or 4 expressions that use the formulaic subjunctive. It's just in some official documents. The court is in session. Everyone rise. Some formulaic things like that. It's not used elsewhere. Don't bother with it, right? Ooh, that's lots and lots of information, lots of grammar for you in a very short time. What do we know? What do we know after all of that? Again, learners acquire their first and second grammars differently. We can't teach everyone the way they learn their first grammar, unfortunately. So we have to find strategies to teach grammar efficiently, effectively, but most importantly, enjoyably. Again, we want students to love grammar. Grammar is a toolbox, as I said, to understand and to be understood. So grammar helps us understand what other people are saying or writing, but it also helps us to produce language which is understandable. There are many ways to teach grammar. Mix them up. I've given you 7 different ways to teach grammar. There's not one good way or one best way. It's really best to sort of mix them up and give different approaches. The variety helps students to learn. Think of grammar as functions, not terminology. Don't think about it as labels. Don't even think of it as rules. Just think it's a function. It's a tool for doing something. And help learners love grammar. To treat it very positively. You say, oh, who wants to do grammar? Or say, oh, good, now we have a grammar lesson. And you move on to that. Okay. All right. So that brings me to the end of the presentation. I think maybe we still have a little bit of time for questions. I'm not sure. What do we say, Joseph? Yeah.
Yeah, we have a couple of minutes for questions. We do actually have a question in the QA, so I hope Elsie is still here. Her question was, how could we let students maintain the grammar lessons taught to them for long? Most of the time they learn, but they forget, which makes them commit similar errors over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very, very common problem. You teach students learn, they also forget. One of the issues is to remind them of the grammar that they're using when they're doing other things. So you have a grammar lesson, say on Monday, but they're going to be using that grammar throughout the week, throughout the month, throughout the year. And so keep coming back to it and teach mini little grammar lessons and stuff. Say, okay, just a second. Yeah, okay, that's a great sentence. And, just to refresh, we're using the past perfect here. How does that work? Remember the rules? Who can tell me the rules? Just, 1 or 2 minutes, basically, but doing that every day throughout the day so that you keep bringing it back to grammar. It does two things. First of all, it does just, keep it in their mindset that, okay, all right, oh yeah, I kind of forgotten that. Now I remember again. But it also gives a sense of importance to grammar so that they realize this is something that's worth knowing and that, I should be paying more attention to because it is useful in ways. Yeah. So that's one suggestion anyway.
Wonderful, wonderful. Do we have any other questions that anybody would like to ask? I know we are running up just at the end of time here, so I want to make sure that if anybody has any questions, they get them answered here. But of course, if you do have questions that you think of later, you can always contact Dr. Beatty. His email address is on the screen there. You can also contact us at eFuture. If you have questions, you can email us at inquiry@eltkorea.com, and we can answer your questions or direct you to the appropriate sources. I'm also including the links to the survey and to the PowerPoint slides in the chat, so you can find these slides there. Somebody did ask earlier if the recording of this webinar will be available. It will be. We'll be uploading it to the eFuture YouTube channel, which should come up. It should be posted either later today in Korea or tomorrow at the latest. The internet is always finicky. But once again, I want to thank everybody for coming. Thank you, Dr. B, for giving us such a wonderful presentation. And I look forward to seeing everybody at our next webinar. So thank you very, very much.